What is good, NIO family? It's Rey-Jay back with another video. And this one, we're breaking down what's going on with NIO stock, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to talk about the overall market, how it's looking, and why we start to see some downwards pressure, and what's going on with all these different tickers from SPY to NIO to the QQQ and Tesla. Before I break anything about all this information, before I talk about what's going on with NIO stock, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, so NIO is down 2.7% for the day. I know a lot of people are very passionate about NIO. And the thing is, NIO is doing quite well so far. Do you guys remember when the market was sinking before and NIO would be down like 6%, 8%, 10%? Well, today it's only down 2%. It's holding up a lot better than before thanks to deliveries. Remember how NIO's deliveries were very strong the last time it came out, and we have some strong projections from Morgan Stanley and many other big banks. That is good stuff for NIO, and I'm still very, very hopeful that NIO is going to do very well. But despite how much stronger NIO is now compared to before, unfortunately, it is not prone to being affected by the whole market and the news that comes out. And that's why NIO is still kind of red. It's going to still continue to be affected by the markets. But in my opinion, I don't see it like crashing insanely hard in a very short period of time, unless there's very bad news for it. So I'm going to break down what's going on with NIO, what's happening to the markets, why is the market selling off? Well, one of the things I told you guys earlier was that the whole market would be dictated by the big earnings coming out for Tesla and Netflix, right? This happened yesterday. And unfortunately, although Netflix and Tesla, their earnings alone were not like that horrible, Tesla specifically had some very, very bad looking guidance going forward. They mentioned that there's going to likely be a big production cut for Q3 of this year. They said they could see worse margins because of it. They said that they could be more open to more price cuts in the future. And they mentioned that the short term may be kind of tough with the rate hikes in the current macroeconomic environment. And they have some struggles going on because of the growth phase they're in. However, for the long term, they're still very bullish. But as a result of them making those announcements, especially the production decline for Q3, that's why Tesla started sinking very hard. There was also news that Tesla had a recall today for only about 17,000, 15 to 17,000 cars, something like that. That's also why Tesla was selling off, and that played a big role in why the whole market sold off the way it did. It wasn't just Tesla that led the way. Tesla does affect the market, at least to some degree, but it's also because of how sentiment shifted after getting earnings that had guidance that were not as strong as suspected. Many people out there were suspecting that earnings would be very strong. The market's going to continue to hold up. That's why the market was holding up, because most of the bank earnings were pretty decent to start us off during the week. However, after Tesla's came out alongside Netflix and we saw these companies just dump after earnings, that's what kind of changed the sentiment, the overall views of the market, and that's part of why the market's selling off the way it is. So for today, we have Capital One reporting earnings and a couple of others after the market closes, a couple of more banks. Then for tomorrow, we have American Express and just a couple of others during the pre-market. But I just want to note that right now, earnings are going to kind of cool off in a way. They're not going to become as significant, as crazy until next week, where things get wild, because we have some big tech earnings. We have like Amazon, we have Google, aka Alphabet, and we have Microsoft, and a couple of others. Big tech earnings are going to be starting for next week. You have to be ready for that. Now, as far as NIO goes, I just want to mention that we had initial jobless claims that came out today. A little bit lower than expected, not the best for the markets, but it wasn't that significant. For Friday, there's not really anything else coming out, so we have no data, just a couple of earnings, and the market's going to move primarily off technicals. NIO has 32 million in volume. It's selling on low volume, which is a good sign for it. On top of this, the price price ratio is still a little bit better than before, meaning that NIO has some relative strength compared to recently. Morgan Stanley had some bullish targets on NIO, and they're still maintaining an overweight rating for NIO, which is bullish, at least for now. And finally, for Fridays tend to be green days about 53% of the time for NIO, but I do think the overall market may impact how that ends up coming. And going into the short interest, we saw about 7.5 million NIO shares shorted just 2 days ago. So there are still more shorts piling in. One thing that is a little bit bad for NIO, however, is the fact that when you look at Tesla, Tesla is giving us a view of what's happening to the EV market, and we are potentially seeing some declines. They told us that guidance is not going to be that strong, but that really depends on a bunch of different factors, because Tesla's in a different place from that of NIO. Now, NIO is going to be impacted by Tesla news because there could be some fears emerging because of potential price cuts that are possible, and also because of production cuts. NIO has not made any announcements like that, so it's not specifically affecting NIO the most. But this effect on Tesla had kind of like many shock waves that made their way through the whole market, including NIO. And that's part of why NIO is down around 3% as of right now. Now, NIO came out with the fact that the ET5 could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 4 seconds, which is very, very awesome. Has high horsepower of about 480 horsepower and other things like that. Has a very strong maximum power outlook. So overall, pretty good for them. There's not much else that came out in terms of news for NIO. But now let's break down the market. The market just closed at the time I'm recording this. What do I see going forward? For SPY, we have a potential head and shoulders on the 30 minutes time frame. So right here, you can see there's this head and shoulders, and we're getting very close to our targets, which is around the 450 area. I think around 450 to 451 is where it's going to base. 450.8 specifically is the 200 EMA, but we have this imbalance very close to 450.2. So somewhere in the 450s, very low 450s, I see it going. It could drop a little bit more, especially during the pre-market. Then I think it's going to base and just try to hold up for just a little bit, but I still could see a little bit more selling for tomorrow. Tesla is still looking kind of weak, continuing to sell off, hitting that 261 area. It actually broke below the 262 gap fill area as well. So we had this gap down here. And we're going to be watching 260. Could Tesla hold 260? Could it try to base around there? If not, I mean, it's currently looking pretty weak. So there's a chance it could come down to like 258 or so. But like I said before, the market's going to try to base temporarily. And whether or not Tesla gets a big bounce next week is going to be determined by the whole market and how other big tech stock earnings go, from Microsoft to Amazon and Google, and the list goes on. If it tries to bounce around here, you're going to be watching 265 as resistance, 268 and 270 as some important resistance levels. In my opinion, it's still looking more bearish. There's no true sign of a bounce, so just be very careful with this. The selling pressure could continue going into tomorrow because of how the market's performing. There could be a little bit more, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as today. But then we're going to be watching if it can base around 260, 258, 255, or 254, somewhere around there. We should see this thing try to base and then try to balance and then make its way up afterwards. I am seeing some potential sideways price action for it after that. But one issue I see for the market would be the QQQ, because the QQQ was looking bearish. It still is looking bearish. On top of this, we have this unfilled gap at 373. I think it's going for this unfilled gap. We might see this get filled either as soon as tomorrow, if not by next week. So I'm going to be looking for a potential bounce in the morning, then more potential downside. I think 373 is a good target for the QQQ. It's eventually going to make its way down there. All right, so the market still looks like it may see a little downside, but I think we might try to see the market bounce a little bit first. So we could see NIO retest 10.44 around there, which is the 50 EMA, then another rejection, and a move down to 10.2 is what I'm anticipating. 10.2 is going to be major support for NIO. If that fails, it's going to come down to this imbalance around 9.9. That's going to be our next target. 10.2 is our very important pivot zone. It's going to try to base around there. I think it's going to test it tomorrow after bouncing in the morning, then coming back down. And if it bases around there and holds 10.2, then it can try to hold that for the majority of the day. If it breaks 10.2, we're going to come all the way down to 9.9 for this imbalance. What do I think is going to happen? I'm kind of in the middle. NIO is trying to hold 10.2. It depends on the news and other factors, but I am concerned it may end up breaking below it just temporarily because of the QQQ and the NASDAQ slowing down. So I'm leaning more in the direction of that potentially happening, but we need confirmation just to be safe. If NIO tries to bounce, watch 10.44 to 10.5 as resistance, and above that, we have these other important levels such as 10.7, 10.8, 11, and then 11.2 after that. What do I think is going to happen? A nice bounce in the morning, a retest of 10.4 or so, then a rejection coming down to about 10.2 as the market sells off a little bit more. And I'm not sure if NIO is going to hold this or not. That's going to be dependent on this trend. It got a double bottom at this 10.2 area. So there's a chance it could try to like hold up and, hold up quite nicely. But if it breaks below it, NIO could be sinking lower. The current technicals are not really suggesting a bounce yet, unless we see what happens in the pre-market. So just be very careful and see if it holds that or not. If it breaks it, it's going to get a rug pull. It's going to come all the way down to like 9.9 or so. If it doesn't do that, if it holds 10.2, we could try to bounce. All right, so we'll wait and see how it goes. Just be very patient and watch it for tomorrow. I do want to warn you that SPY and the QQQ do have some more potential downside coming. So does Tesla possibly. It's still very possible, so just be well aware of that and do what you have to do when it comes to adjusting or making any moves. Thank you for listening. Have an absolutely spectacular rest of the day. I'll talk more to you I'll talk more about all of this tomorrow. All right, NIO to the moon as long term is still very bright, and peace out.